At exactly 11 a.m. Thank you. Exactly when hey, while people are joining, let me just say this thing. My name is Dr. Shannon Coates. Please feel free to call me Shannon in your correspondence with me. What do I do? Who am I? What do I do? Oh yeah, I'm a voice educator. I develop resources for voice teachers, primarily for independent voice teachers, but academic voice teachers, welcome to play along. I do work with lots of academic voice teachers as well, and some of the resources that I develop include the Voice Ped Degree, for which we're doing registrations right now. So if you are interested in a comprehensive 10-month figure out who you are as a teacher and a cohort of people who are also doing the same thing, please get in touch because January 6th, my calendar's over here, January 6th is the start date, so registration window is closing. I also come on here pretty regularly to do some live office hours, such as the ones we are about to embark on, and share voice pedagogy stuff, lots of other things. There's a library. You can get into the library for as low as $97 a month, and then you can see recordings of my of classes, etc., etc. Okay, I think you get the gist, right? I do stuff like that. All right, here we go. What are we talking about today in these live office hours? Today we are talking about the myth of belting, the myth around the idea that belting is hard. This is almost every single live office hours that I do is based on around either something that I'm observing in, the pedagogy sphere, in the voice ped sphere. Yes, based on those things that I see floating around, people talking about stuff, people asking questions, also the work that I do with voice teachers. I do some one-on-one consults with voice teachers as well. But also in the Voice Ped Degree, one of these themes that comes up all the time is sort of understanding the things that are a legacy of the training that I have had and a legacy of the sort of culture that we are in terms of voice pedagogy and the pedagogy and educational culture, and understanding when those things don't actually align with my values and with the way that I want to present in the studio. Often inheritance, the legacy of our education and of the way that we have been taught, etc. Often the things that we've sort of ingested as being truths or best practices are myths and or don't align with our values and aren't actually best practices in terms of education and in terms of how we work as educators and our role as educators, as well as how learning works. Often they are not best practice or just outright lies, just outright myth. So one of these overarching themes is around Western classical elitism and around some of the things that Western classical training and Western classical teachers, academia, etc., tells us about singing. And in this case, we're talking about singing in particular, but in the larger scheme, we're also talking about teaching and pedagogy and what the things are that we have ingested without realizing about teaching and how to teach. And in this case today, we're talking about belting. So we're talking about an aspect of singing, a kind of singing, or a way to coordinate our bodies. You could say a technique if you wanted to. There's a lot of talk about belting is not a register. Belting is a blah, blah, blah. Belting is it all depends on how you define register. What is belting? Well, we all know it when we hear it, right? We all know, oh yeah, that's belting. We all know it when we hear it, and we all know it when we don't hear it. And yes, we do have some pretty specific parameters from voice science, from acoustics. We do have some pretty specific parameters around what looks like, say, on a spectrograph or something along those lines, and why we perceive specific tonal outcomes to be belting and others to not be belting. So we do have some specifics around that. But often what we have in the voice world, with voice coaches and voice pedagogy and textbooks, etc., often what we have is this kind of dire warning around belting, about how it's dangerous if you try to learn how to belt on your own, or if you come in and you don't have the guidance of someone who really knows what they're doing when it comes to belting, how that can be really dangerous. And whenever I hear a teacher talk about how you have to be careful when you're belting and how you have to build up to it gradually, or how it is an elite skill, I know right away that teacher has bought into the lie. They have embraced the myth. So what are some of the things we hear from voice pros all the time? You see things like, if you come in last minute to a lesson and you want to learn how to belt for an audition tomorrow, or you have a gig or you have a performance and you want to learn how to belt tomorrow. That's on you. I won't teach you because I am a responsible educator, and I won't let you belt until you've developed the skills you need, the foundation you need, the right support, until you've built up the muscles, the technique to be able to belt healthily, right? That's the thing that comes around all the time. I see it all the time on my feed. Also, what else do I see? I see lots of like, well, if you are belting in these ways, like if your head is here, if your neck is here, if your tongue is here, if your larynx is here, then you are gonna hurt yourself when you're belting. I also see lots of like, well, if you're with the wrong teacher, only the right teacher who has the skills can teach you how to belt. So there's a little bit of truth in there, for sure. There's a little bit of truth in there, because if you are a teacher who thinks that belting is hard, who thinks that belting is dangerous, who thinks that it is an elite skill that should only start learning when you're 16 or 17. And to be fair, I have said all of these things myself. Like, I've had a 180-degree turn on this. So like, I have said all of these things. We're gonna talk about that in a minute. I personally have said all of these things. I have said to teenagers, no, belting is a skill we're not gonna learn until you're 16 at least, right? Until your instrument is ready. Belting is this heavy lift. And until your instrument is ready, we're not going to learn it, and you're not going to learn it. You can't belt. I won't let you belt until you're 16, until you're ready for it, until I know you're ready for it, your body's ready for it, out of protection for you, right? I don't want you to get hurt. I have said these things, and these things are all over the internets as well, right? These things are all over the internets. So why? Why do we embrace these things? Why did I embrace these things? So first of all, I started voice lessons when I was 13 years old. I was in choirs, all the way through my schooling, all the way through, what's it called? Undergrad? No, public school, thank you. I was in choirs all the way through public school. I was in musicals in public school. In high school, I was in musicals and choirs. And what was communicated to me by my very classically minded first voice teacher and subsequent voice teachers, and what was communicated to me in choirs, what was communicated to me, like I listened to George Beverly Shea. Anybody know George Beverly Shea? Sandy Patty. When I was growing up, that's who we listened to at home, right? I grew up watching folks in my church burning, rock records in a bonfire in the parking lot. I grew up seeing that. So we really believed that this was not good music, right? Really not good music. So for me, there was a religious element to it. There was a moral element to the belting sound, or to a rock sound, to the beat, to the actual rhythm of rock. There was a moral element, a morally, it was bad. So I did not grow up listening to any of that, right? I didn't have any of that in my ear. All of the musicals that I was a part of would be considered, we did Pippin, we did Carousel, we did The Fantastics, we did all of the musicals that I was a part of are considered sort of golden agey, right? There's no belting in those musicals in what we would consider today's sense. The choirs I was in, all of the messaging in my voice lessons, in the competitions I sang in the everything, all of the messaging was that this Western classical kind of style, or this non-belty, non-yelly kind of way of using the voice was preferred, was morally superior, was gooder, was healthier, right? Less danger, healthier. All of those things. Also took a year between high school and university to put my audition stuff together to go to university for a classical, of course, performance degree. My voice teacher at the time, she told me that I had to stop leading worship at church. I was leading worship at church in a contemporary style, not belty, but contemporary style. Some of you know the difference there. I was leading worship at church. She told me that I had to stop leading worship at church, and she didn't tell me I had to. She told me I had the choice. But the choice was to stop singing in those styles or to not get into university, because she did not have the tools to be able to teach me how to recognize when I was in one style or the other. She did not have the tools to support me to be able to sing both simultaneously and understand what the differences were in terms of voice use, but also stylistically. She didn't have the tools. And also, she had some preconceived ideas about how using your voice in that way could be detrimental, right? So I wanted to be an opera singer and wanted to get into university, and so I made the choice to stop singing in any sort of non-classical styles and to step back from leading worship and to not, to get out of the contemporary worship. And sometimes I didn't even sing at church. Yeah. So all of the messaging, again, was toward you must choose one over the other. One is better than the other. One is healthier than the other. One is kind of base. One is more elite and desirable. Also, because I had all of this sort of background that I just talked about, I also do not have a memory of easily belting, if you will. I didn't listen to any kind of rock music. I didn't listen to music theater. So I thought U2 was dangerous. I told my uncle, who's only a couple years older than me, who was a huge U2 fan. I'm sorry, Uncle Johnny. I told my uncle, who was super into U2 at the time, that U2 was really dangerous, and I told my brother that he should really be careful because it's really dangerous, it's really dangerous music. Bless. So I do not have a memory of easily belting. However, I learned how to belt later in life when I had decided that I wasn't going to be an opera singer, and I then started to lead worship again in contemporary styles. And of course it was maybe a decade later, and so there were, Hillsong. Anybody who's familiar with Hillsong, you're going to understand my trajectory here. I started to figure out how to do, Darlene Check, how to sing in that sort of mixy belt sound. I figured that out pretty quickly. I moved from only being able to use my voice to create sort of Western classical tonal outcomes to be able to line that pretty quickly. And at the same time as I was figuring that out, I was also working with lots and lots of contemporary worship singers and leaders and telling them to be careful about belting. And I was making sure that they didn't hurt themselves while they were belting or using mix. It was really mixed, but I was really worried about them, and it didn't occur to me until a little bit later that that was a real cognitive dissonance, right? Where on the one hand, I'm figuring this out really easily on my own, kind of from my ear, from necessity. I'm I need to have this sound. Let me see. And it happened, and I was like, oh, okay, good. I can do that sound, no problem. Also, it helped that I had said that I'm not going to be an opera singer anymore, right? So I didn't have to worry about ruining my opera voice, right? So there was something about sort of letting that go. But at the same time, so this cognitive dissonance between, this is actually pretty straightforward and pretty easy to do, and also feels kind of natural when I'm doing it. And also, I'm telling people they have to be really careful. That's cognitive dissonance. I've talked to so many singers, so many voice teachers who are in this place of cognitive dissonance where they are working with untrained singers who can belt their faces off easily, seemingly. They've come in and they're and at the same time, in their mind, these voice teachers are saying, oh, but you have to be careful. I have to make sure to manage so they don't hurt themselves. I've got to give them good exercises so they can figure it out. Meanwhile, they've already figured it out. That's a cognitive dissonance where you're seeing someone do something with ease or on the way to doing it with ease, and at the same time, you're telling them to be careful, or you're worried about their health, or there's something inside you that's going oh, but I've got to protect them. That's cognitive dissonance there, because what you're hearing and experiencing does not line up with the things you are sure you're supposed to be saying and doing, right? Because they're already doing it. And you're oh, but I have to protect them somehow. The other cognitive dissonance that comes in, 3 styles of cognitive dissonance we're kind of talking about today. The other one that comes in is when I've worked with so many voice teachers with this, who are I used to belt, when I was a teenager, I belted like that. It was so easy for me. Why can't I do it anymore? Why can't I find that belt again? It was so easy. Yeah? When did you start taking voice lessons? Is my first question. Oh, when I was 16. And then the penny drops and they're oh, right. I heard from my voice teacher all of the messaging from my teachers and from my degree and from everything else, blah, blah, blah. All of the messaging was that belting is harmful, dangerous, you have to be careful, it's an elite skill, you shouldn't be able to do it easily. You know what that does? Cognitive dissonance. So now I'm but I can do it easily. I guess I should be really careful. Guess what being scared of the sounds you're making does to the sounds you're making? Guess what happens when you're making sounds really easily and someone says to you, oh, you should be really careful. I want to just make sure that you are doing the right exercises so that you can be protected and you don't hurt yourself. What happens? What happens? We can't sing those sounds anymore. We can't make the sounds anymore because we're so scared, right? It shuts us down. It shuts down the process. It shuts down our ability to create those sounds with ease. Cognitive dissonance. My body's doing a thing. My brain's telling me it's not right. But it feels right. But my brain, everybody else says it's not right. And then what happens? I'm working with you now at like 35, 25 even years old. Yeah, 25. I'm working with 25-year-olds, literally 25-year-olds who I saw belt easily at festivals, et cetera, and who have now had lots of wonderful Western classical training and who are wonderful Western classical singers or opera singers, up and coming opera singers, and who can no longer belt. Why can they no longer belt? No one gave them the options. No one told them how to figure out the two different ways of using the instrument. And they got a lot of fear around belting, around that coordination. Now they can't do it. They're scared. And rightly so. Someone told them that if you do that, you could hurt yourself. Or you might not be able to sing opera again. Or it'll sneak into your opera singing and then everyone will know that you do too much contemporary singing. And then we get, like I said, we get online or in our studios or in our textbooks. There's lots of stuff in our voice textbooks, let me tell you. Talking about the risk and talking about how this is a heavy load and belting is high pressure, therefore it's a heavy load on the body and therefore we have to be really careful. All of that just reeks of protectionism, right? Which isn't really a word, I'm kind of making it up, but it's sort of like paternalism, right? Where I feel responsible for you from the best of intentions. I have to say, we always have the best of intentions here, or not always, but often we have the best of intentions, or we think we do, right? We're operating from this like, but I want to protect the singers I'm working with. I don't want them to get injured. Of course you don't want them to get injured. Of course you want them to be healthy and be able to do what they want to do with their voices. And that is different because often what happens is that turns into paternalism. It turns into us protecting them. It turns into us helping them, which I talked about last week as well. And it seeps into all of our teaching and we then become fearmongers and gatekeepers, right? We gatekeep this skill, this high-level skill. We talk about how it's so hard, it's such a heavy lift, it's high-pressure singing, so you really got to be careful. If you don't do it right, you can injure yourself, blah, blah, blah. We talk about all of those things. We fearmonger and we gatekeep, which I have done. 100%. I have said all of these things. In fact, I'm probably on the record somewhere. There's probably some video somewhere. There's probably some blog post somewhere. There's probably some adjudication somewhere with me saying it. There's probably some lesson recording somewhere with me saying it. I'm sure there's a lecture somewhere with me saying it. Absolutely, I have said all of these things with the best of intentions. We all know what the road to hell is paved with, right? Really good intentions. So, what's the truth about this thing? And again, when I work with voice teachers, singers, when I work in the voice pet degree, for example, when we are working one-on-one, when we are working with consults, when I'm working with voice teachers in their studios, this can be very validating information. So let me throw it out there. First of all, yes, belting is a high-pressure activity. Yes, it is. There's no question about that. We use a different kind of pressurization in belting and in some other contemporary tonal outcomes, contemporary sounding, if you will, tonal outcomes. But so is tenor in the upper register. Same level of pressurization. Maybe not exactly the same, but similar kinds of pressurization levels. It's not about the pressurization. That is the thing we say. We say, oh, it's high pressurization and also, thick folds and blah, 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 resistance of the pressurization. There's a lot more to it than that, but we also try to make it really simplistic, which it isn't actually, but whatever. It is to the body though. It's very simple, very straightforward to the body. How do I know this? Because we all use the coordinations that we use for belting every single day, almost every single day in our regular speech patterns. When I am doing this and now I'm suddenly see how I'm hey! When I'm doing that, so I am using that kind of sound, hey, dude, what's going on? When I use that kind of projection kind of sound, that is the coordination for belting. We just extend it. It's an extension of lots of the ways that we use our voice in every day. It's an extension of everyday voice use for all of us. It is not hard. We do it almost every single day. It's not hard at all. In fact, it is a very natural part of the way that we use our vocal instrument, the way that we use our voice is our birthright. Don't let anybody take your birthright away from you. It is very natural. There is discussion around how racism also comes into play when we think about belting as being bad or being lesser or being, uncivilized. There's lots of discussion around how racism is also part of the reason that we tend to look down on belting and want to make sure that we are gatekeeping it to a certain extent and tell people not to do it and have told people not to do it. Why? Because a lot of the way that we use our voice in natural everyday settings, the tonal outcomes that come to us when we are in high emotion or when we are singing or when we need to be heard, those are tonal outcomes that we have associated, especially in North America. I'm going to just speak for North America right now, but especially in North America, that we have associated, especially as white folks, we have associated with the Black experience and with Black music. Yeah. And what do we associate with white music, with elite music, with the music that is better, higher, more civilized? Western classical, right? So there is also an element of racism that comes into this as well. When in fact, Western classical singing is the thing that takes a long time to learn. That's the thing. The coordination that is required to be able to be heard unamplified in an orchestra, in all areas of the pitch range, etc., etc. The coordination that's required to do that kind of singing takes a long time to learn. Why? Because it's not natural. It doesn't come to us naturally. There are very, very few self-taught, if any, self-taught Western classical singers, right? Right? Isn't singing opera in some ways more dangerous than belting? So it depends on how we define dangerous, right? Absolutely, it just depends on what our definition of dangerous is. Yeah, tenors, that's what tenors do. It's highly pressurized, the same way that belting is, right? And they're shaping in a slightly different way. So it really depends on how we define dangerous. The reason that untrained singers come into your studio, many cases, being able to belt easily is because they have not yet heard it's bad for them. It is a natural way to use the voice. It is simply an extension of the way we use the voice in everyday speech and language. So the reason often that untrained singers, young ones, or folks who have only ever sung in contemporary styles, who have only ever used their voice in that way, right? So untrained singers of all ages often come into the studio being able to belt with ease or use their voice in that way with ease. They've never heard that it's bad for them. That is not to say that there is not a role for us as voice educators, coaches, voice pros, voice teachers, etc., to work with singers who are belting. I've worked with many a contemporary voice user, folks who are in bands who are getting tired over time, who, especially when they're starting to go through 40s and 50s, their voice doesn't work in the same way that it used to work. There's lots of reasons. That's the other thing. I used to say that you couldn't do it, you couldn't belt until you were 16. I wouldn't let you belt until you were 16. The control, the gatekeeping, it's embarrassing a little bit. The paternalistic mindset, I'm helping you by telling you that I won't let you belt until you're 16, until I know that you have the right foundations in place. It is really ingrained. It is. From the best of intentions, right? That gatekeeping, it is ingrained, but from the best of intentions, we think we're supposed to be protecting them, which is a lie. It's not true. Every time someone uses their voice in a high emotion situation where they use that coordination, that specific coordination, they're belting. You can't stop someone from using their voice in that way. Tell them, no, I won't let you. It's the height of paternalism. I won't let you. Also, I won't teach you how. This is, to me, the most arrogant gatekeeping. Kills me every time I see it. I do see quite a lot on socials. Voice teachers and coaches saying, I won't teach you how to belt until I know you have the foundations. Friend, we are born with the friggin' foundations. We all have the foundation to belt. We're all doing it every day. Maybe not every day, maybe not all of us, but see how I'm high emotion right now? That is the same, I'm using the same coordination. All I needed to do was extend the breath on it and maybe stabilize a little bit in my torso. Now I'm belting. It's the same coordination as the coordination I'm using right now because I'm high emotion. So our role, when we're working with young folks who are still working with their instrument, right? Who may be belting with ease, but who probably have some spots where they might overpressurize. Great, that's fine. Or maybe they have some spots where they can't figure out how to mix, which means that they're working with They're working with shaping and they're working with pressurization. Maybe they have spots where they haven't figured out how to mix on specific vowels, or they have spots where they can't figure out how to, get them. Fine. That's all fine. That is our role then, right? Our role is to support them as they discover how to use their belty voice. That's our role. Oh, Samuel, not controversial to me at all. Love this. I'm going to read it aloud. Controversial, but the lack of chest voice development in Western classical, chest voice development in Western classical singing might be linked to no belting rules in voice studios. Absolutely. When we have sopranos who have holes in the middle voice, that is a soprano or a mezzo. That is a soprano or a mezzo who has been told they can't belt, who's been told not to use their chest voice. So they haven't figured out pressurization, shaping, and what it means to have thick folds, blah, 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 resistance to that pressurization, et cetera, et cetera. They haven't figured that out in the middle voice because all they're doing is the stuff that works for them in the high voice. Oops. Yeah, they need to have some work in a higher pressurized kind of singing and the requisite shaping, et cetera. They need to have some work in that in order to have middle voice. Absolutely, 100%. And yes, it is tied to that. I would agree with that 100%. I don't think that's controversial. Maybe it is controversial, but it's not controversial to me. To me, that is completely valid, like 100%. Absolutely, absolutely. When we communicate that chest voice is bad, it's lesser, or belting is bad, it's lesser, it's yelling, it's unsophisticated, it's unhealthy, it's dangerous, we're going to find our Western classical singers who don't have access to entire parts of their voice because of that. Yeah, 100%. So our role when we're working with young singers who have the coordination already is to ensure that we are validating that coordination is that you're like 70% there, you're 90% there. Next week I'm going to talk about how when we say something is right, we're wrong. So we're not going to say it's right or it's wrong. We're going to say, yeah, you're like 75% there. Or we're going to work with singers for them to be able to self-assess where they are. So we've got singers who we're working with to develop coordination in there so that they have options. Not because we need them to be healthy, not because it's dangerous, none of those things, but because we are working with singers so that they have options and so they have agency over their voice, right? That's what we're working with singers for. And if we are working with folks who are training in Western classical styles and we are communicating that chest voice is bad or dangerous, we need to do a little bit of work around that, I think. We need to figure that out. We need to figure out why do I need to tell this singer that it's bad for them? What is happening there? We need to get curious about that and maybe figure out, you know what? That's some gatekeeping crap that I picked up from somewhere and I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that teacher. I don't want to be the teacher who tells someone that using their voice in a very natural, everyday way is bad or wrong or dangerous. I don't want to be that teacher who limits a singer's voice use and options. Especially when having good access to that style or those tonal outcomes, yes, can be really helpful for creativity, 100%, discovering other aspects of the voice, and economic survival. Exactly. It is practical to learn, 100%. The whole point here of this particular office hours, and the reason I wanted to talk about it is this. I would love for us as voice teachers and as voice coaches, as voice pros, to get really good recognizing when we are perpetuating gatekeeping, paternalism, racism, Western classical elitism, when we are perpetuating those things. And one of the really clear touchstones, one of the really easy ways to figure out when you're doing that is to monitor or see how you talk about belting and how you feel about belting, how you present belting to the students you work with. If you are presenting belting as something that is elite level, something that is hard to learn, if you are gatekeeping around it, I have done this, as I have said, I'm not going to teach you how to belt until you're 16 at least. We're not going to work on that until you're older, until your system has settled. Mm-hmm. Every kid on the playground knows how to belt already. And also, they're going to be doing it whether you're working on it with them or not, because every 5-year-old knows how to do this. Every 10-year-old. We use this coordination every day, right? So this one issue, belting, however you define belting, this one particular kind of voice use, this one technical aspect, if you will, of singing, this one way of using the voice can be a very good touchstone, can be a very good way to monitor my level of need to gatekeep, to protect, to help. So my response to 10-year-olds who want to belt. It can be a really good window into how much Western classical elitism, how much paternalism, how much Master-Apprentice, how much I still need to control, still kind of ingrained in there. It could be a really good window into that, this whole thing around belting. And chest voice use, if you want to use it that way too, if you want to talk about chest voice use. If you're primarily a Western classical teacher and you have thoughts about chest voice use, that can be a really good window into, how much Western classical elitism am I bringing into the studio with me? How much of that is still ingrained? How much of that is still part of the way that I teach? And then you get to decide, maybe you want to keep it. Maybe that is in keeping with your values. Maybe you think you have a right to tell singers how they're supposed to use their voice. Maybe you do. And if you think that, well, then you might want to hold on to that gatekeeping. You feel free. But also, I hope you feel a little called out. Because you don't. It's not our role as educators, but it's a whole other live office hours. The technical skill of belting is also a great way to see where you've got some cognitive dissonance going on. When you've got cognitive dissonance going on, that is when you might want to get curious, right? So again, for me, the cognitive dissonance for me, 3 kinds of cognitive dissonance we talked about today. The cognitive dissonance for me around belting was that I somehow picked it up really easily as an adult after having done Western classical training and singing. And at the same time was communicating that it was dangerous and hard and people needed to be careful. Boop, boop, those 2 things, not the same. That's like that's dissonance there, right? The other kind of dissonance is when the thing you're observing in front of you, you've got an untrained singer in front of you who is belting with ease or using their voice with ease, maybe even only 60% of the time or 75% of the time. But still, with ease, they have access to those sounds. And at the same time, you're telling them to be careful. You're telling them that we've got to work on their foundations. We've got to make sure that they know how dangerous belting is. That's cognitive dissonance, where the thing you're actually literally seeing in front of you happen with ease, you're saying, that's not happening with ease, you have to be careful. Cognitive dissonance. The other one is the one where you as a voice teacher remember that it used to be easy for you to make these sounds, and now it's not. What happened there? Again, little dissonance in there. Little like, wait, what? Those are all good ways to know that you may still just carrying around a little bit of like harmful rhetoric, if you will. A little bit of projection. Could be that, for sure. Yeah, all of those are just really great little ways to be like, oh, I'm going to do a little more reflection on this. And so if you need it, let me offer to you the coordination we use for belting is a natural, innate coordination that is available to the vast majority of the population. Of course, there are exceptions. It is available to the vast majority of the population of human voice users. If you need this validation, if you need the thing that perhaps will allow you to kind of break the cycle of fear and gatekeeping and making sure they're safe around belting, if you need any validation, and if it helps, if my validation helps, feel free to take it. Feel free to be like, no, Shannon says. Or feel free to think back to the untrained singers you've worked with who belt with ease already. Or think back to your own self when you remember belting with ease. That wasn't an aberration. No, you can do it because it's your birthright. It is a thing we can all do. Okay, have fun with those thoughts this weekend. See how they sit for you. If you're interested in working a little bit more closely with me, please send me a message. All right, take good care, friends. I hope that you are belting with ease and that you are doing some nice examination of the things that may told you that belting is hard and also only for elite singers who have developed this whole base and also can only be taught by very special teachers. And if and when you happen to notice folks on the socials saying things like, all the things that I have said before, sadly, I hope you will take a moment to just recognize that that is not perhaps the way that you want to show up in the studio. Think critically when you hear a so-called expert on the socials or in a voice ped text. Lots of voice ped texts that talk about just voice use, over pressurization, like pressurization is dangerous, etc., etc. Have to be careful. Think critically. There we go. Take care. Ending.